Welcome to the CEO group conversation. There was a prep video, but don't worry if you haven't seen it or the docs, feel free to ask questions, even if they're duplicative of some of the content. Stella, you have the first question.
Thanks, Ed. Recent CEO OKRs this past quarter and coming quarter have focused on management training and working in the GitLab way. How is management at GitLab different from management at other companies? And what tips would you have for a new manager who's hoping to ramp up quickly?
Feels like I'm planting questions. But
no, I actually saw the pattern and I wanted your take on it. I figured better to ask you now than a one-on-one.
Great. Thanks for doing it in a public channel. So one thing I'm planning to do is doing a managing so everyone can contribute course. And I think some things that are different at GitLab is, for example, iteration, like trying to reduce the scope and get something done quicker. Transparency, our focus on results over input, our focus on efficiency, how we create a diverse, inclusive company where people feel they belong, how we collaborate, how we run meetings, how we use the handbook, how we do communication, and how we pay attention to situational leadership. So all of these require some unpacking. That's why I'm planning to make a course about them. And there's more than just these things, but this is my top 10, and I welcome contributions in the doc. You all have edit access, so you can leave a suggestion or there's plain edited. Thanks for that, Stella. Rob.
Thanks, Sid. So we are doubling our numbers of hires this year, and we're revamping our onboarding to ensure increased connection and increased content that helps our new members onboard quickly. But how can existing GitLab team members help more generally foster a sense of belonging and help team members onboard quickly, but also feel very welcome in the process?
Yeah, thanks for that. There's a lot of, I think, small things we can do. I know that when we close an executive hire, I have the entire team reach out to them right there and then. I think that'd be nice. I think we can, in the physical things we send, I think we can it's now very focused on onboarding and sending a laptop out and things like that. I think it would be nice to have kind of a welcome gift and something they can kind of show off to their social circle too, because it's a big event to get a new job, and I think we're under investing in that. I think there's an onboarding buddy, but I'm not sure the responsibilities of that person are well described. I think, and that might cause the experience to vary of people, but I don't have any data for that. I think that common misperceptions about, for example, the handbook. The handbook, if you just start reading everything, it looks more like a rule book than a guidebook, and it doesn't seem malleable. It doesn't seem like you're able to change it. And we used to require people who onboarded to make a change to it. That's hard when you're new, but I think we can invest in kind of guiding people through that. I'm sure people have ideas, but they're just not sure they're good ideas. So I think we can do more coaching there, where you don't fix a typo, but they make a substantial change. Those are some ideas that come to mind.
That's great. We're working on some of them in L&D, so that's great to hear your take. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. And one more thing. In the onboarding issue, we collapsed things to make it not overwhelming, which I think is great. But if you now want to get an overview for everything that's coming, you're clicking 16 things to see whether everything has happened. I think there should be GitLab functionality in a markdown file where there was kind of collapse, uncollapse to uncollapse all or something like that.
Okay, great. Noted. Thank you very much. I have the next question. So we recently launched an interviewer experience survey, and one of the questions in the survey is whether team members feel that interviewing is part of their role. The great news, at least for us and for me in my role, is that over 85% of respondents believe that it is. As we scale, I'd love some ideas on how we continue to foster that culture of hiring. And then connected to the above question, how do we then turn that into a culture of onboarding so that working as hard to make people feel welcome once they join?
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is that we make sure the interviews are differentiated. For example, we have 6 values, typically of 3 interviews or more. Every interviewer could get 2 values to focus on. We make sure that the interviewers who do that have kind of sample questions to choose from. They get a practice round, and a kind of a value trainer certifies them that they're now able to interview for that. And then we use the outcome of the interviews to factor in the onboarding plan. Hopefully in the interviews, but especially in the reference calls, you're going to learn things about the person, and that should be input for your onboarding plan to make sure you address any kind of weak spots, or you address any concerns they have, or you address any ambitions they have in that.
Super helpful, Sid. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. Feel free to put questions in the doc. Feel free to verbalize questions. And don't worry, it's okay if you ask something that was in the materials.
Hey, Sid, I actually will ask a question, and then if someone could add to the doc, that'd be great. So I noticed a Slack message that you had shared about kind of the internal handbook versus the public handbook. And I was wondering if we intend to have any kind of KPI around, the amount of content that we want in the internal handbook versus the public handbook. The thought being it would be similar to kind of our KPI around the % of Slack messages that we hope are public versus direct messages. I think it would be helpful to have some kind of metric there to prevent people from just defaulting to the internal handbook because they're concerned about whether the content is safe. And so I think, some kind of metric there might help people, encourage people to be more thoughtful about where the content should go.
I think that's super thoughtful. I think there's certainly the risk of that it's the no risk option is the internal handbook. We should make sure that people understand the risk of like losing our transparency, so that there's pressure on it to do that. We haven't seen it go wrong yet. There's a chance that it will go wrong, and we need a metric. But first, let's wait. With Slack, we do know that there's kind of a back pressure needed. One thought is that Google Docs is actually a bigger problem than, like, it's harder. The company is going to benefit more from moving from Google Docs back to the internal handbook than the risk of going from public to internal. But we'll see how it develops. But I think all in all, hopefully the internal handbook is a win for our transparency, even if it's like going from limited to internal transparency. And then, I think it's also maybe not this quarter, but in future quarters, I want to make sure that some of the things we moved to the internal handbook wholesale, we split up so that the stuff that can be public moves back.
Cool. Thanks, Sid.
Great idea, but let's keep an eye on it before we start instituting metrics with all the work that entails. Tim.
Yes, I'm finishing typing up my question, but on slide 13 of the deck, it was talked about improving meeting formats and additionally training managers appears to be one of the goals. I was curious, what was the context of the offsite discussion? And then has there been any consideration of creating maybe like a meeting audit process that people could sign up for and say, hey, I'm running a meeting. I'd love some tips and tricks on things that I should be doing that maybe I'm just not aware of or I've skipped over from the handbook perspective.
Yeah, thanks. So during the offsite, we had a discussion like, hey, there's a general feel there's too many meetings, but there's no easy solutions, but it's just a combination of a lot of things. It's the, hey, don't present in a meeting, but record a video up front. It is the, make sure if you invite people that you are careful about marking them as optional. Make sure that when you're invited, you notice whether you're optional or not, and feel free to not come. Make sure there's great notes so people can just consume those instead of attending the meeting. Make sure that you question the frequency of a meeting regularly. But also, for example, one thing I was surprised about after the offsite, I had a call with CEO skips, which used to be all directs, so 40 plus people. And there were 0 questions. And what was reported afterwards that most people said, well, I need time to consume the materials, but the materials were in there 24 hours plus before. So apparently of those 40 plus people, no one had prepped for the meeting. Not only that, but I have the feeling that people don't review, or that many people don't review like next day meetings. And I love some input from people in this meeting. But what I always do at the end of the day, I go through my meetings for the next day. I quickly look at the materials, and if some like context is missing, I ask the person like, hey, can you add context? So we're well prepped, and I had the feeling that that's not a standard practice at GitLab. So those are things we'll be training for.
It's an interesting one, Sid, because I'd actually pinged Stella on this last week. I'm noticing that the increase in meetings is leading my teams to start earlier and finish much later. And if they were to do that prep for the next day, that would then be eating into their family time and eating into the time that they would normally spend with, doing other things after work, which we also encourage. So I think it's an interesting way to think about how we build into the workday that planning for the next day. And if we have this increased culture of meetings, it will be more and more difficult to carve that time out.
Yeah. I spend, I think, 10 minutes because like most of the meetings, I know what's going on, why they're there. I know what the prep is. It's a one-to-one doc. I don't need a ton of time on that. So there's like 3 to 4 suspect meetings to spend a couple of minutes on each. Now, sometimes I conclude, look, I don't have to be in that meeting. And sometimes it's going to lead to a better use of time. So I think we should be very critical of the meetings we're in. We should make sure those meetings add results. And I think a little bit of prep time on average should save time. I'm blessed that I'm on the West Coast, so it's easier for me to kind of call it a day. But I tend to not work after 6 p.m. So I think the solve to meeting overload is not to allocate time for more meetings, but be more diligent about the output that meetings should have. So.
If I could make a comment here, Sid, one of the things that I appreciate about you is anytime I'm watching a meeting, there's usually one or two things that you're critiquing on, making sure that people are following procedures within the meeting to call out, hey, this is where we could be better. And I don't necessarily know if I feel confident in doing that same thing. And I think there's probably a lot of other leaders within the organization that could just be like, I think the training could help call attention to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible in these meetings. And when we're not, make mention of it.
Yeah. And I think like 1% of the meetings should probably be shut down by a leader as soon as they start and say, this meeting wasn't adequately prepped. We're not having this meeting. And that takes confidence, that takes training, so that we're all on the same page about what we're expecting of a meeting, but that doesn't seem to happen. So we're probably wasting a ton of time in meetings that weren't adequately prepped, where there's no proposal on the table, where there's no clear outcomes for the meeting.
We're currently revamping our manager training, looking to launch it in Q3. And Tim, that's a really good point. I think we can include something in there to ensure that our leaders, regardless of level, feel empowered to call these things out and keep driving the culture forward as it pertains to the way we manage meetings. Thanks for that.
Cool. Stella, can you add that to the meeting handbook, that approximately 1% of all meetings should be shut down as soon as they start because of inadequate preparation?
Will do.
Thanks. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.